All right. Thank you. Well, good evening. You are in for another fun and furious and friendly edition of Voices on the Green. For those of you, let me see armpits of how many new people we have here tonight. Put your armpits up. Okay, that's what I always ask for, armpits, because you know that. All right. Well, good. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here. What this is something which is definitely for the community. We get together and we hear each other's stories. We hear each other sing. We hear each other's hearts with what has made them who they are. We always do Voices on the Green with a different theme every time. Once every 2 or 3 months we do it. And the theme usually encompasses someone who is speaking academically about a topic, someone who is people who sing about a topic, and someone who is giving stories and or poems about that same topic. And that way we can all hear how different approaches are to that same theme. Tonight, we have something special downstairs for those of you who are blessed with children but wouldn't like to keep being blessed with them right now. We downstairs, there is a very, very lovely gentleman named Marlon Carey, who is my partner in a group called Shakespeare Hip Hop. He is doing storytelling and activities for children, K through whatever age that might be. And with that, it's also what he's doing is also based upon the theme that we're having this evening. The theme this evening is The Day My Life Changed. And of course, you're going to hear stories big and small about that, about things which someone didn't notice until later on that was a day that changed their lives. And of course, you're going to hear about the other ones where people realized immediately that things were changing for them. You're going to hear songs also on that topic. And we won't have the sort of academic lecture about that because we want to hear more stories and hear more people talk about it. And so we have a pretty rich program. I want to give you guys some housekeeping notes here. First off, we will really ask, I think it says here now, please do not come up the middle aisle. If you have to go in the back right here, please feel free to go around this way and go through the exit sign. If you're looking for the restroom, right behind that door there's a restroom, but also there are several restrooms downstairs. So we have a bridal stairway down here. You can go down there for the restrooms. You can also go to another restroom, find your way down there through here. If you go through the back, make a right, you'll see another exit downstairs. What else do I have to say? Yes, we have sponsors. For the very first time, some business in Lexington gave us some food. And we always have to acknowledge when they do that. They were like, your entertainers must be hungry. Let's give them something to eat. So we would like to give a very special shout out to Prime Pizza and Roast Beef, which is in Merritt Square. And they supported us tonight. So if you guys ever go there, keep going there. And of course, we also want to give a big shout out to the people who's made a lot of this possible. We'll talk about some of those other special folks later, but tonight we have lights because of AVFX in the house and their loan of the video equipment. We have High Output who loaned us their lighting. Give them a round of applause. And also Monroe Saturday Nights for the backdrop and everything they do to help make this possible. And they tomorrow night are having a special performance of Indian dance. So if you are in the mood for that, and who is not, you should go and check that out. Monroe Saturday Nights tomorrow night. So I think, do I have any more announcements before we just jump right into this? Oh, yes. Well, this is a church. We like to tell people, put your cell phones in worship mode. So please turn them off. And that would be greatly appreciated. And when you see someone else who's coming in who has not turned their cell phones off, please give them that advice to turn the cell phone off. They always go off at the wrong time. And what else should we say? Okay, I'm hearing something. Is that the voices in my head, or are we having a collective auditory hallucination? Okay, so with that being the case, let's move into this because we are going to have a very rich show. Oh, one more thing. At intermission, we will have food for you, which is free. Go and eat as much as you like. And we also have drink, right, which is not free. But we do take donations for that. And you are allowed to bring the drinks into the sanctuary. I know some people don't think you can, but this is a UU church. We love our wine. So if you want to bring your drinks here into the sanctuary, you will be blessing us, okay? So first up on the microphone. Oh, man, this is going to be great. Singing. A song, always get to start things out with song. Singing the song. This is the moment. Will you please welcome Chris Hess, backed up by Rip Jackson.
This is the moment, this is the day, when I send all my doubts and demons on their way. Every endeavor I have made ever is coming into play. It's here and now, today. This is the moment, this is the time, when the momentum and the moment are in rhyme. Give me this moment, this precious chance. I'll gather up my past and make some sense at last. This is the moment when all I've done, all of the dreaming, scheming, and screaming become one. This is the day. See it sparkle and shine when all I've lived for becomes mine. Through all these years, I've faced the world alone, but now the time has come to prove to them I've made it on my own. This is the moment, my final test. Destiny beckoned, I never reckoned second best. I won't look down, I must not fall. This is the moment, the sweetest moment of them all. This is the moment, damn all the odds. Today or never, I'll sit forever with the gods. When I look back, I will always recall, moment by moment, this was the moment, the greatest moment of them all.
Chris Hess, Ripple Jackson. Indeed, thank you both. Next up, we are going to move into our first storytelling moment. And I am not giving too much background, probably any at all on people, but everything you would like to know, they've given us a short bio inside of your program, so please look at that. And that way I don't have to waste too much time talking, and we can get to hearing what they have to say. If you would be so kind. Coming up, our first storyteller, Brenda Prusak.
This is the moment against all the odds. Thank you, Chris. I would like to really thank the friends I see here tonight, particularly friends from Douglas House who are here. And the friends who really helped encouraged me to do this. I'd also like to dedicate this effort to Al Jacobson. With all my nervousness, Al. Al was a wonderful friend to us and a great mentor to me. It was 1982, the second year of our second marriage. We were contented. but we had no child in our lives. We made a decision to adopt a child from Korea. Though we knew our combined ages eliminated the chance of our adopting an infant, still, we could adopt a toddler. We started the adoption process. First, we completed a course on adoption for new parents. Next, we knew our caseworker, Hamai, would come for a home visit. On the day of the home visit, you could not find one crumb on the floor. I'd made cookies and the house glowed with plants. I tossed the dreary fern into the trash. What kind of a mother would keep a dying fern around? When the doorbell rang sharply, it felt like a plunge into freezing water. Please come in, Hamai. So, Larry, she smiles, you're an only child. You didn't grow up with siblings. You didn't have to negotiate sharing your toys. Do you think it's going to be difficult for you now to have a child now that you're 40? How will you share tasks with Brenda? For example, who's going to change the diapers? I think that's a good question, Hamai. Brenda, you've taught children for a long time, and you have 3 sisters, but that's very different than being a parent. You know you're going to have to stay at home for a full year with your child. What challenges do you see in that for yourself? That's so easy. I'd wanted to be a mother and a teacher from the time I'd lined up all my little dolls and stuffed bears in front of the fireplace and taught them. But are there right and wrong answers to these questions? We follow our plan to gloss over our own tricky beginnings in life. Can we be less than perfect and still have a child? A few days later, we are told we are qualified to be parents. We are told we are smart enough, financially stable enough, sufficiently clean and moral enough to have a child placed with us. Month after month is ripped off the calendar. At the end of 6 months, Hamai calls us. Brenda, I have a picture of the child you've been assigned to. I can't tell you any more than that. Can you be here at 3 tomorrow? We wait outside of Hamai's office. There's nothing to look at but a black door, the passageway to happiness or sorrow. Hamai comes out and tells us, I can only let you see this photo. No questions, please. You have to make the decision right now. Do you want this child? Hamai gives us a small photo of a 2-year-old girl named Hyunmi Kim. She weighs 30 pounds and is all of a yard long. She appears to be in good health, but there's no smile on her face. She seems to be saying, take me, I'm yours. I have nothing more to give you than what you see. Her dark hair has been pulled back into ponytails. She's been dressed in what would be considered a good dress for the occasion. The dress is a white sundress with blue and red and green stripes down the front. It's this little photo I carry with me at all times. My fingers tuck it safely into my bathrobe pocket. I prop it up on the dinner table. The photo sits beside me as I drink my morning coffee. Hyunmi is my secret companion. I have no swollen belly, but I do have a child growing in my heart. I share this little photo with family and close friends. Some ask, what happened to her real parents? Are we not real enough? One afternoon, Larry calls me. Bren, sit down. Oh God, Larry, just speak. Okay. Hyun-mi is coming. She's arriving at Kennedy Airport on Saturday, February 18th. Have you ever tried to run away from ticking clocks? I lie in bed throwing the covers on and off. I'm never hungry. Whatever I wore yesterday is on my back today. Our kitchen shelves are stacked high with Korean packages. Magically, I think I'm going to understand Korean instructions. Hyun-mi's room has my studied attention. There are oversized books and teeny tiny books, and books that pop up with surprise monkeys, and books with lullabies to lull her to sleep. Toys are hidden in the attic. I don't want to overwhelm a child who's never had anything to call her own. I constantly make plans in my mind. We'll make chocolate pudding. I know, we'll do it on the kitchen floor. We'll do music classes together. I know, I'll learn to speak Korean. Then came the day Hyun-mi is scheduled to arrive. We fly to New York City. Our friends have lent us their apartment. Friday is a total blur. We traipse through Central Park on the lookout for families with children. We return late to the apartment. I plan to have an exquisite soak in bubbles before we go out for a last romantic dinner at our favorite French restaurant. Out of nowhere, the phone rings. I panic. I hear Larry saying, "Tonight? The plane is in Anchorage now? You mean she's arrived? She's in Alaska?" This is the call that immediately changes our lives. We learn someone from the adoption agency forgot to figure in the international date line. Hyun-mi is here. I leap out of those bubbles. Come on, Larry, let's get to the airport. At Kennedy Airport, we're directed to a separate area. Here, other families with an entourage of friends wait for their expected children. Half hours slide by. Suddenly, the far door opens. In a flurry of cries, tears, and shouts, babies are delivered to outstretched arms. There's no Hyun-mi. What if at the last moment her mother, her birth mother, decided to keep her? We watch in remote silence as small groups of families gather their balloons, stuffed animals, and their long-awaited for child. We're left behind, totally alone. The vast room expands into deep silence. I begin negotiating with God, the God I keep tucked away for emergencies. Look, God, if you give us Hyun-mi, I promise. Suddenly, the door bursts open. We're very confused. We see a tall pilot striding purposefully toward us. The Korean stewardesses in their high heels strain to keep up with him. All are beaming smiles at us. Then I see, tucked in the pilot's arms, a tiny little head poking out. I see only matted black hair. The rest of this tiny little body is hidden in the blue of the pilot's arms. Can I trust the universe after all? Is Hyun-mi really here? The pilot ever so gently walks to me and gives me Hyun-mi. I enfold her tightly. With immense joy, I feel her tired body nestling into mine. She rests her head against my chest. I whisper to her over and over again, "You are so perfect, so beautiful, so very much loved." I look into Larry's eyes, filling with tears. Tears roll down my cheeks. The pilot and stewardesses all have wet cheeks. Yunmi looks at all these teary faces. She scrunches up her little face, and then she too begins to cry.
Thank you, Brenda. That's what these stories do. I've known Brenda for years and never knew this at all, right? And so thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you very much. And for the fly dress you brought in, it's really nice. Next up, we have our second storyteller. She's the DLRE of this church, and she is a wonderful, wonderful storyteller, human being. And her husband is also a great musician. Will you please show a lot of love for Lisa Maria Steinberg?
Good evening. Thank you, Reggie. Matt will be happy he got a shout out.
Yes.
My dad was the best. He loved us just fiercely. He loved us protectively. He was a traditional Italian-American man in that way. He believed that his first and only responsibility was to provide for his family and to raise his daughters to do whatever it was that we wanted. My dad taught me that loving others and helping them to grow is no small thing, and in fact, it is the only thing. We lived in a pretty well-to-do town, and although my parents both had graduate degrees from Dartmouth, they were high school history teachers. That does not pay terribly well. And so for all of my life, my father worked 2 jobs and sometimes 3. And he did that so that he could again provide for his family and support his daughters. We loved him for that, and the whole town loved him for that. He rode his bike every day in the summer, 20 miles a day. Everybody would wave at him. It's a town of 3,000 people. Everybody knew him. He had 4 yearbooks dedicated to him over a 30-year teaching career. Those of you know that is a lot. I remember when I found the 4th one, I'm like, did they just run out of people? But no, they loved him so much. And he owned business in town, he was a realtor, and he was known for just being ethical and kind and caring about everybody. And he did all of those things, and he umpired my softball games, he went to every single one of my piano recitals. When I started gigging in junior high, he was delighted because he got to be my roadie. Because at 5'8" and 135 pounds, he was really only suited to be a roadie for a 13-year-old who weighed 85 pounds. So these were things that just brought him joy. The Red Sox also brought him joy. You can't really tell because it's just a brick wall, but that's us out at Yawkey Way having sausages before a game. So on December 1st, in 2002, I got a phone call. I was out in California in grad school at Starr King School for the Ministry. And back then, answering machines, people could actually talk into them and you would hear them. And my mom yelling into the phone for me to wake up, "You have to come home." Despite being perfectly healthy, my father had a pulmonary embolism, out of nowhere. And that was that. He was 57 years old. It was 5 days after my 23rd birthday. When we set up for his memorial service, we set up 400 chairs in the town hall, and it was still standing room only. Everybody loved him so much. He was selfless, he sacrificed, and that's the man that I knew. So I took a leave of absence from seminary, moved back to New Hampshire to help the family out. And, well, it's a very rural part of New Hampshire. You have to have a car to get around. So my parents had 2 cars. My dad had this Toyota pickup truck, 1986 truck. It's white. I learned how to drive on it. And the truck was a stick shift. So he thought, if you learn how to drive on this truck, you can drive anything. And he's right, I can drive anything. But a year after I learned how to drive on that truck, he had the bench seat reupholstered. And he came home, he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. The guys, they did this weird thing when they reupholstered it, and you can't move the seat. You just can't. It's bolted, the welding, so I'm really, really sorry, but you can't drive the truck anymore. So I was like, okay, all right, whatever, I'll drive my Jetta. But I sold the Jetta before I went to grad school. So here I am, back in New Hampshire, and my mom's got her car, and my dad's truck, I can't drive. Everybody knows this. My dad's business partner, Mr. Kniff, knows this. I call him Mr. Kniff because he was my band director. He's always going to be Mr. Kniff. He's told me to call him Bob like half a dozen times. I'm not doing it. But Mr. Kniff knew about this. My dad's best friend knew about this. Everybody knew. Unless you're 5'8", you cannot safely drive this truck because you cannot move this seat. Well, I'm the tallest woman in my family at 5'5", so that puts all of us out of the running. Well, I borrowed a car from a neighbor for a little while, but after a couple months, we realized that I was going to be taking more of a leave of absence because instead of the priority being me going to grad school, my family needed me in New Hampshire. So I had been working, but didn't have enough money yet to get a vehicle. So Mr. Kniff says, okay, I'm going to come out, I'm going to take a look at it, bring my tools. So we just didn't really know what he was going to do because remember, like welded bolts, like how? Mr. Kniff comes out, he's got his tools, comes, opens it up, it's just him and me in the driveway, and he reaches down. Smooth as silk. So it had been moving back and forth, greased up for years. My dad lied. He lied to everybody. Mr. Kniff and I we looked at each other and then gave me one of those sideways hugs that Yankee men know how to do really well, And he's like, take it easy. I'm like, okay. I'm not really sure how long I stood in that driveway. I know I kicked the tires a few times. I know I shouted a few things up into the sky, which given my usual position up here, I'm not going to repeat right now. It was colorful. But that was the day that my life changed. That day in May, 15 years ago, where I realized that I had really fully lost my dad. Because I now saw a whole part of him I never knew existed. I saw him as not just my parent, but I saw him as a person. And my life changed because a whole part of the world opened up to me that day. Because even though my father was so selfless and sacrificed so much, he needed something for himself, even if it was just hey, can you all not drive my truck, please? It's my truck. So I'm not driving the truck in this picture. My husband is actually driving the truck in this picture, who, since I met him 5 years after my dad died, my dad never had the joy to know my wonderful husband. That's me wearing my 4-month-old daughter in the back of the truck. It is now technically an antique, and it has the plates to prove it. My mother keeps it in good condition, and we all drive it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Maria. And now for something else, for another song about a place which also is, I guess, not exactly what people think it is. We're going to have Disneyland sang to us by Chelsea Cannon.
Sunday night, I guess the folks were busy fighting. Joe'd already left home. 11 years old on my own, feeling nothing but lonely. There's nothing to do, there's nothing out there but the traffic down on State 93. So I'd sit through the night by our old black and white TV. And that's where I saw it. That's when I heard it calling, calling me. Disneyland, Magic Kingdom, Disneyland. Close my eyes real tight, wishing hard I might, wishing hard I may find my way to Disneyland. Gotta get to Disneyland on a western breeze. Magic carpet, please carry me away. Oh, I know you're gonna say the trees are paper mache instead with mirrors. The magic there, each little bird's full of sprigs. You press a button, it sings recorded music in the air. They've had the mountain refaced, it's only plywood and paste. Go on, say it. I'll turn around and tell you I don't care. I don't care. I will live in Disneyland. Make my home in Disneyland. Maybe it's all fake. That's the chance I'll take. It's perfectly okay. Someone give me Disneyland. Take me there to Disneyland. And when I get to Disneyland, I'll stay.
Chelsea Cannon. Have you guys liked the singing so far? That gentleman who's walking away, he's responsible for picking all the songs and for playing the music. Please give a round of applause to Rip Jackson. And quickly, before I bring up two people who are very special to me, I just want to give a reminder to the storytellers. We have 5 to 7 minutes. So if we can try to keep it along 5 to 7 minutes, and what I'll do is I'll try to give you a very, not too crazy wave or something, but see if you can find me. If your sphincter begins to constrict because you realize that you're getting like to 5 minutes, look for Reggie. Okay, and I'll just be like 1 more minute. So just remember that. But my special moment coming up for me is because these next two young people, we have some young folks in the house. And the next two young people who are coming up are people who I have worked with, had the pleasure of working with at Grub Street. And they were members of a slam team, which is a poetry performance team. And they did very well this year. And first up, I'm going to bring up someone who is from right here, living right here in the hardcore ghetto streets of Lexington, Massachusetts. Okay? Will you please show some love for Lillian J. Elmore.
Can you do the sit-up thingy? The sit-up thingy? Yes, I would love that. Thank you very much. I think that should be good. Yeah, I think so. Sorry, I'm a poet, not a technician, so, All right, I'm Lil, and this is Paper Doll. I am a paper doll. When I met you, I was happy. I found a new playmate, a new person to love unconditionally. We got close, and pretty soon I was the plaything you couldn't go anywhere without. I am a paper doll. You were my aid. You were hired to help me do the physical activities I cannot do myself. Writing my math homework down, reading documents my eyes cannot process, helping me with the day-to-day things I cannot do. I know you didn't mean for that to happen, but it did. I wanted to run because my body told me to do, but I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't tell you what you did. There were no words to say what I needed to say, only screams of frustration. After that day, it was different. I was no longer your cherished plaything. I was uncomfortable for that entire long weekend. I was done with being a paper doll. I felt so ashamed of my body, because even now, when I look down at the woman I am, I know that I will never have the control over or the ownership of my body that everyone else has. I was done with being a paper doll. So I sent you a text, told you the why, I apologized for my odd behavior, and I told you how you could fix me. But I guess you didn't like that. You took it to the board, locked me in a room with other people I trusted. You threw vicious words, daggers at my heart. You tore my China mask apart. I tried to do something, say something, anything, but it was all just about you, because after all, I am just a paper doll. So of course nobody listened. So I was punished for a crime I didn't commit. You knew I needed help with these activities. I don't know what you thought this was going to consist of, but me staying silent was not in the job description. I hope you know that I didn't mean for the text I sent to make you upset. Yes, what you did to me was an accident, but the words you said were not. I've only told this story to a few because people tell me this is considered trauma. I'm quieter now because when I speak up, I'm just going to get knocked down. My grades slipped because your voice is the only thing that stays in my head. Thanks for permanently changing my character. Thanks for permanently lowering my self-esteem. Thanks for telling me that staying silent and holding back tears when you feel uncomfortable is the only option if I want to stay sane. But I am not a living doll anymore. The next time something needs to be said, I'll make it thunder, I'll make it roar in their ears, I'll make them listen to what I have to say. I am not a living doll anymore. I'm a human with a heart that will keep on beating.
Lillian J. Elmore, thank you so much for doing this. And I know how difficult that was. That was a day you realized that you shouldn't do something, and then a day you realized you had to do something, to stand up and speak up for yourself, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Next up, we're going to bring up her teammate, who also was on the 2018 Slam team with her. Her name is Elizabeth Sline, and she will be doing a poem as well, and she's all the way here from Scituate, so please give her a healthy round of applause.
No, I'm good. Thank you. Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and this is Sweet 16. I will always remember my 16th birthday. Not because of some epic party or because I got my own car, received gifts of my dreams, but because 24 of us sat side by side, limbs overlapping on the floor of a storage closet, as we were told nothing and everything we needed to know. Live streams recording, Snapchats reporting a day at school had turned interesting. The lessons on chemistry postponed, phones sneaked in through baggy clothes, kids choosing to celebrate the victory of duplicity against the teacher instead of thinking about the Grim Reaper. The silence crescendoed into whispers of nervousness as we learned outside our school was a potential gunman who could hold our last breaths between his finger and the trigger. The recent years have bled with misery. All we know is history. The gun won't show mercy. The bullets don't have biases. The shooter knows that they will get away with more than they will be punished with, because lives are worth more than any prison sentence. It seems we are the casualties of stubborn political policies. Why is a right valued more than us children? How many more have to wind up dead for this to end? 1,480 miles from my desk. Distance doesn't make it hurt any less to hear 17 have died. We've seen Cruz's face so many times, we could draw him at night under the inky sky, yet the children are forgotten, lost to the 20 shootings that have already marked 2018. On my 16th birthday, I was released from a storage closet after 4 hours of uncertainty and anxiety. The protocol was over, the conversation resumed, but what was left was a residue of fear, of disbelief that we were safe. The potential shooter was in custody, but not everyone in our position had been so lucky. On my 16th birthday, the reality of school shootings became crystal clear. On my 16th birthday, I blew candles out. My breath snuffed out the flames as violently as the light from the eyes of children gunned down. Thank you.
Elizabeth Slime. Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have our last set of storytellers who are coming up, and they're coming up together. Will you please welcome Jim Jones and Deborah Yardley Beers to the stage?
About 4 or 5 years after my divorce, I started going back to square and contra dancing. Something that always felt very good to me. I could get into it, get carried away by it. So it was a pleasure to pick it up again. And with the idea that, okay, I was doing this for the music, for the dance, for the interaction, and not at all with the idea of it being another dating venue. I mean, though still, how pleasant it was that there were women present. This particular time that happened, my younger daughter was in the Greater Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra. She played the flute there. And she came home at one point with a T-shirt, and bless her, she gave it to her dad. It had a musical score on it. And what a item of prestige. And it was from my daughter. So naturally, I was going to wear it. The score was the Rite of Spring. No, it's okay. And, so on this particular night, going out to the scout house, I was wearing that shirt. And as I was dancing in the contra line, going from partner to partner, I noticed this very attractive young woman, sparkly. I particularly noticed how well she carried herself. She really knew what she was doing. So when the set was over, I hurried over to where she was sitting and asked her to dance. So off we went. And as we went into the balance and swing, really going very smoothly, I noticed something odd. She was looking at my chest.
So at that time, I had reached a certain age without finding a life mate. And I decided if I have not found one by now, I'm not going to. I will stay single for the rest of my life, and I will make the best of it. So when a friend from a women's group suggested we go dancing together, I thought, okay, I love to dance. So off we went to the Concord Scout House, and I saw this guy there wearing a really interesting T-shirt. It had an orchestral score on it, and you know, in dancing like this, a T-shirt will appear and disappear and appear and disappear as you do your do-si-dos and everything. And I became more and more curious. So I waited until a break and said, "Can I read your T-shirt?" And I looked at it. Now, maybe some of you who look at that score would know right off the bat what that is. If you do know, if you did know when you first saw it, my hat is off to you, because I looked at it and thought, uh-oh, I'm not sure I can do this. I usually play the piano and I see 2 lines, but here are all these lines. I don't know if I could do it. So I started reading very carefully the notes. I saw those repeated notes at the bottom. There's an F flat. Sort of interesting notes, and I put them together in my head, and I saw these notes don't usually go together. They're made up of 2 chords played at once. Oh, I think I remember this chord from music theory class. Dr. Boda put it up on the board. I think this is the chord. And he said, this is a really important chord. You ought to remember it with the 2 chords coming at once. And this is very different in the history of music, how this harmony was being used. So I just said to this guy, "Is it the Rite of Spring?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "It is?" Because I didn't quite believe it. He said, "Yes." He didn't seem particularly impressed or surprised. And so we had a nice little conversation, and I thought, well, that was fun. There are interesting people here. And so a couple of weeks later, I went back to Concord with my friend from the women's group. And this guy was there again, and we got in a conversation at the break. And he said, "Would you like to go out sometime? Are you at that stage of life?" And I thought, why yes, I guess I am. So we had a very nice first date, and this guy came to mean more and more to me as time went on. And the next thing I knew, I was outside those very doors with my father, and Jim was up here with his 3 wonderful kids. And then we were saying important words to each other. And then Helen Cohen, our minister, who is now Minister Emerita, was also saying important words. And the next thing we knew, we were going outside and starting a new life together. Thank you, Igor Stravinsky, for helping me meet my husband, introducing us through that amazing chord.
No. There's a postscript. As a postscript, it occurs to me that if I were trying to make a play for a specific, truly special sort of person, the message I was wearing could have not been more to the point.
And now you can hear this chord being played, and it goes on as long as we have time for.
Lovely. Dance of the Juveniles. Thank you so much, Jim and Deborah. Well, before we go into our very last presentation before the break, I just wanted to remind everyone that back here, you can go right back here where the exit sign is. That is where we're going to have Parish Hall. That's where we will have the food and also the drink. Again, you can bring the drink back here into the sanctuary. If there's any other questions you might have or some things you'd like to know, I'll be around, so please come and find me. And so our last presentation for this, before we take our 15-minute intermission, is a song. It's a duet, Amy Johnson and Chelsea Cannon singing For Good.
That people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them, and we help them in return. Well, I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I'm who I am today because I knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good. It well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is made of what I learned from you. You'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now whatever way our stories end, a ship blown from its mooring by a wind of the sea, like a sea drop by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed for good. And just to clear the air, I ask forgiveness for the things I've done you blame me for. But then I guess we know there's blame to share, and none of it seems to matter anymore. Like a comet blown from orbit as it passes the sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through a wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I do believe I have been changed for the better. And because I knew you, because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed for good.
Thank you, everybody. 15-minute break. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Please go eat and drink and be merry. All right. Has everybody been enjoying everything so far? Great. Well, we have more to come. So we appreciate you, everyone who stuck around, and we even appreciate those who had to leave. But we appreciate all folks who come into this place and listen to stories and listen to people open up the mouth and let the drum that beats in the chest be heard. We are going to have more stories. We're going to have more songs. And we're going to have the first person coming up. We're going to open up with a storyteller. So if you wouldn't mind welcoming, and I can't see him, but I'm assuming, yes, there he is. Will you please welcome Don Jansen?
It's not gassed up, so we're not going to do it tonight, but I left home September 5th, 1959, planning never to return. 5 years earlier, my father moved our family of 5 from comfortable suburban Seattle to a small island 5 miles from the Canadian border in northern Puget Sound. The island had 50 full-time residents and 3 children in the one-room schoolhouse. Our new home was a dilapidated farmhouse, unheated, built by the homesteaders in 1895. There was no running water, no indoor plumbing, a hand-cranked telephone, 20-party line, and a 2-seated outhouse about 100 feet down the hill. Everything needed fixing. 5 miles of falling down fences, collapsing hay barns, homestead itself. The previous owners had had a cattle ranch and chicken business and had let it go. Initially, it was exciting for a 13-year-old boy like me. Chance to show my muscles, living the rural farm life, felling trees, chopping wood, driving tractors, pickup trucks, hunting and fishing year-round. But by my mid-teens, the little house on the prairie had become my nightmare. I was lonely. There were no other teens to talk with. With a father whose parenting style was my way or the highway, and an evangelical Christian mother, immense unspoken frustration brewed. I felt imprisoned. By 16, I was obsessed with getting as far away from the farm as possible, but I was afraid to tell anyone. So I began living two lives, a fantasy life full of interesting people, lots of teens, and the real me. Daily, I went through the normal routine of farm life like a robot that dreamed. In the fall of '58, I applied to MIT, and much to my joy and my father's amazement, they accepted me. From the moment of my acceptance, I gyrated between completely terrified and ridiculously euphoric. One moment, I pictured myself stepping to the podium in Sweden and accepting my prize in physics. The next moment, I imagined flunking all my courses and being sent back to the farm, a truly horrifying thought. I imagined Boston teeming with people, yes, maybe even Jewish people. I wondered what they looked like. I couldn't wait. Finally, on the day I was to leave, I drove with my parents from the farm to the ferry dock, about 3 miles. During those 3 miles, 3 things were on my mind. 1, I was never coming back. 2, I was going to be a great physicist. And 3, I hoped I could figure out how to get girls to take their clothes off. Because at that point, I knew a lot more about cattle than girls. Beneath those thoughts, an ominous voice whispered, "You can't manage your life away from the farm." That voice was never far away. I arrived in Boston, this is 1959, at dusk. I got out of my cab, Kendall Square, opened the door, and was greeted by a blast of nauseating air, soap, Necco chocolate, and soot. I walked over to the back of MIT and was met with shabby, old wooden buildings left over from World War II. It was also deserted. My heart sank. This was not like the front page of the university bulletin. Suddenly it hit me. I knew no one. This place was old and ugly, and I was probably not smart enough anyway. "I can't do this," rang in my head. I wanted to turn around, but all I had was a one-way ticket and not much money. The next morning, I walked over to Back Bay and instantly fell in love with Boston. Thousands of students were moving into apartments, dorms, fraternities, sororities. Girls were everywhere. Boston looked like Nirvana. My first class, oddly enough, was humanities. I was characteristically overconfident for no reason. I came into class with a new friend from Chicago, and as we started to get into one of the middle aisle seats, 3 boys rudely pushed past us and grabbed the front 3 seats right in front of the instructor. From the moment the instructor started speaking until class was dismissed, these 3 boys wrestled verbally to show everyone they knew more than anyone in the class, including the instructor. They tore apart accepted ideas, proposed new theories, constantly challenged the instructor. I soon learned they were from the Bronx High School of Science. What was that? Already shy about asking questions, now I was petrified to even open my mouth. How could I say anything in front of those boys? If I did, everyone would realize I was essentially illiterate. I had trouble initially with calculus. Concerned about not doing well in such a core course, I contacted my faculty advisor, who happened to be in the math department. I sat down with Professor Abramson, explained my situation, and he was speechless. He pulled at his beard and finally said, "Well, read the book." I cringed, thanked him, and that's the last time I saw him. Walking back alone across the Harvard Bridge to my apartment, I thought about going back to the farm. No, I spurted it out. Hell or high water, I am going to learn this stuff. Well, I survived. I didn't grow to love my college, but I really loved my new home, Boston, and the people that came to live here. I realized most people have their farm or their calculus. Though I moved 3,000 miles away, parts of the farm, and my parents, of course, are still with me. Last summer, I took my 2 oldest grandsons on a hike from the farm, a hike I often did as a teen when I needed alone time. It was west down channel through unbroken primeval forest. We walked under huge Douglas firs over sunny knolls with 6-inch thick moss. Deer trails were everywhere. No houses, no roads, no power lines. I told them stories of life on the farm when I was their age. The once-a-week baths in sheep watering tubs warmed by the sun. The whole family in one bed one night during a fierce winter storm. Playing hearts and charades by candlelight when the power went out again. Shooting my first deer. The woods were just as I had left them 60 years ago.
Don Jansen. Our next storyteller, speaking of when the day that his life changed, please give it up for Paul Brulette.
The day I adopted Joel was everything to me. It had been everything that I expected it would be. But 5 days after I came home from Vietnam, my life changed in a completely unexpected way. My mother died that day, less than 24 hours before she was to meet her only grandchild. To better understand the impact that day had on me, you'll need a little history about my relationship with my mother. When I was a kid, she was angry and critical, and I got hit a lot. When I suggested that it might be nice to get some positive feedback, she said, "You're just like your father. You always want to be told how good you are. My job is to tell you when you're doing something wrong so you won't do it again." Once I got older, I asked her why she never said she loved me, and she said, "It should be obvious that I love you," and because my mother never said it to me. Whenever my father commended me about something, she would invalidate it, sometimes reducing me to tears. My father would always comfort me and tell me not to listen to her because she didn't know any better. Being at college was liberating, but my relationship with my mother continued to erode as I struggled to come out. She lectured me on the perils of homosexuality and implored me not to tell my father. 6 weeks after I graduated from college, my father had a massive coronary, and 5 weeks later, he died. After the funeral, my mother told me that she was glad that my father never he never found out that I was gay, because if he hadn't died of a heart attack, that would have killed him for sure. To numb the pain, I went shopping. For 6 years. But it only made things worse, so I got help. As I began to heal, I learned a lot about myself and who I wanted to be. I also learned that my mother's anger and abuse were not my fault. Things were challenging with her, but I knew things were getting better and they were improving one day when, out of the blue, she told me how impressed she was with what I had done with my life. And another time, she offered to introduce me to a gay man in my hometown. I kept thinking, who are you and what did you do with my mother? When my cousins had kids, she started dropping hints about wanting grandchildren, and my brother and sister showed no signs of granting her wish. I had always been moved to tears by stories of abandoned orphans, and it bothered me that I had a decent home and a family, imperfect as it was, but the orphans had neither. It felt like the universe wanted me to be a parent, and I couldn't help thinking that a grandchild might help continue to heal the relationship between my mother and me. When I told her I was going to adopt a baby, her reaction was tepid. But when the first 2 pictures of Joel arrived and the date was set for me to go to Vietnam, she went straight to obsessed, doting grandmother-to-be. She begged me to take her shopping before she left for her annual month-long trip in Florida. And I was leery about buying things before I got Joel. But I'm glad I went because those shopping excursions turned out to be the best moments, some of the best moments I'd ever had with her. My mother went to Florida, and then I, a few weeks later, went to Vietnam to get Joel. I flew home on a Friday. She was flying home from Florida the following Wednesday. That Wednesday afternoon, she called me and said she's home. I said, I'll bring Joel to meet you the next morning. We chatted for a while, and suddenly she stopped and she said, I don't feel well. So I got my brother-in-law to go to her house since he worked a mile away and I lived an hour away. He called the ambulance, but she went into cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital, and they couldn't save her. When I arrived at her house the next morning, I found this next to her suitcase. Ironically, it says, Daddy and me. That's what I used to call my father. In the year following my mother's death, I was flooded with anger and grief. But I was grateful that I had this beautiful, happy baby, because he gave me such a sense of purpose and focus. At the same time, I often felt completely incapable of meeting his emotional needs, and in stressful moments, I verbally lashed out at him, which filled me with shame and guilt. That's when I knew I needed to get help again, so I hired a parenting coach. In my sessions with the coach, I recounted the stories of my childhood, followed by the stories of continued healing, forgiveness, and validation that I had been robbed of by my mother's untimely death. In the process, the coach helped me realize that those were all just stories, and that I now had the choice to create a different story, a new story about the loving and nurturing parent I had promised myself I would be. Over the last 16 years, I've endeavored to create that story, which includes telling Joel every day that I love him, saying I'm sorry when I get upset with him for something that's not his fault, and giving positive feedback as much as possible. The story also includes empathizing with him when he longs for a mother who is not physically present, surrounding him with women who shower him with affection, and teaching him that our life doesn't always turn out to the way we planned. As my parenting story has unfolded, I came to believe that my mother was helping me write it, to make amends for what she did or wasn't able to do when I was growing up. And recently, I've also started to believe that when someone tells me I'm a great parent or that Joel's a great kid, it's my mother who's telling me that through them, and that she's also saying, You're just like your father, and that's a good thing.
Paul Brulette. And next up is All of Us. We love to hear from the community's voice rising collectively in song. And so Rip Jackson is going to lead us in a very familiar song, which most of us should know, but if you do not, we will be projecting the lyrics onto the screens. So if you would be so kind as to let everyone hear your voice and let us sing out loud, that would be beautiful. Yes. Thank you. Next up, to continue us in story, will you please welcome Amy Kval.
Okay, David Rose prepared me, but not for the tears as the lead-in to my story. 8 years ago, I felt my life couldn't be happier. My husband, Andrew, and I were living in San Francisco under a majestic blue sky, and we were gifted with two of the most joyful and bubbly, beautiful daughters. Caroline, who was age 3 at the time and now 11, welcomed her baby sister Cecilia, now age 8, into this world with the widest of smiles and deepest of love you could ever imagine. Caroline had prepared for the birth of her sister by folding all of her newborn clothes, laundering the crib sheets, and finding Cecilia a most perfect little lovey, a small blanket with a frog's head that had very much resembled her own precious Snuggly, the only difference being that Caroline's was the head of a bunny. Caroline has always shared so much love for her sister. Since that time, I still wait for the day that Caroline asks, "When does the baby go back, Mommy?" But I don't think it'll ever come. Caroline is the best big sister anyone could ever ask for, and she exemplifies the true meaning of love. Caroline's love is and always was so great that it overflowed and poured so deeply into Cecilia's own precious body the day she was born. Cecilia came out with wide eyes that sparkled at the sight of her sister. Her legs kicked so enthusiastically as Caroline skipped around her that you could tell she couldn't wait to take part in the sisterly dance. In July, when Cecilia was 4 months old, on one of these happily skipping blue sky San Francisco days, our lives suddenly changed. We were stopped in our tracks and forced to think about what matters most in the world. Caroline and I had taken Cecilia to her 4-month well visit. Andrew was back at work, and it was a new typical day. We'd walked to the doctor's office from our apartment just a few neighborhoods away, with a San Francisco hill or two to climb. Caroline bopped beside the jogging stroller because she never wanted in it, and Cecilia nuzzled against my chest in her Baby Bjorn front carrier. The doctor's visit proceeded as expected: introductory questions, a weight and height check, physical appearance scan, blood pressure, and then came the stethoscope, a chance for the doctor to listen to Cecilia's heart. What surprised me most was the doctor's pause, the furrowing of his eyebrows, the adjustment of the stethoscope, a closer listen, a longer pause. He then put down the stethoscope to tell me that he'd heard a murmur, something unusual, a murmur we'd need to further research. He wrote down the number for cardiology, and he told me to call them and to get an appointment as soon as I could. The next thing I knew, our visit was over, and I was back out on the street, Caroline bouncing beside me, Cecilia happily kicking in her Baby Bjorn, blue sky above, and our entire reality had changed. Next came a call from my mother. At first, I couldn't even speak. I lifted the cell phone to my ear, and tears streamed down my face as I sobbed what had happened into my phone. My mother calmly reassured me, told me to call Andrew, and guided me to walk right over to cardiology, just 1 more block away. We arrived. And I'm not sure if it was that day or days later, but the tests and the scans began. After poking, prodding, listening, looking, and a great deal of medical jargon later, we learned that Cecilia had a secundum atrial septal defect, a hole in her heart. We also learned that while 80% of these close on their own, likely Cecilia would fall into the 20% category given its location, where she would need heart surgery at around the age of 1 once the heart had a chance to grow a bit larger. The news rocked our world. All of our bubbly, happy, blue sky energy deflated like the air taken out of a beautiful balloon. The next few hours, days, weeks, and months proceeded as if we were living in a fog. Answers to our lingering questions about moving to the East Coast, closer to our siblings, our parents, changed. We needed to move home. We needed our parents. We needed to feel the love pour into our hearts more deeply than ever felt before. And there was one more thing we needed now. We needed Children's Hospital in Boston. If there was going to be a fix for the hole in Cecilia's heart, we would best find it there, the most celebrated hospital for children in the world. The move happened rather seamlessly, and we soaked in the warm welcome of our families, Andrew's parents, Marty and Bob, lay the groundwork for all the love we found in Lexington, and they took us into their home and their town with open arms. They made themselves available for whatever we needed, morning, noon, and night, including a doctor's visit here and there. The hardest of those visits was the day we set aside for a sedated echocardiogram at Children's Hospital. This would mark the beginning of our plans for Cecilia's surgery. The echocardiogram was to measure the size of the hole in Cecilia's heart at 1 year of age, and it would assess what steps we would need to further take. I still remember the hospital nursery room where we spent that day, the crib, the alphabet quilt, the rocking chair, where I nursed Cecilia to sleep and feared she would never wake up again. Andrew and I sat, we paced, we waited as the doctors took Cecilia into their care for the better part of the day to take their assessments. As the day drew near to a close, finally they came in to tell us that Cecilia was in the recovery room. She was waking up, and that team of doctors was waiting to share their results with us. Hand in hand, Andrew and I walked into the small, dark room filled with doctors, residents, and a collection of computer screens, all hosting evidence of the day's work. I will never, ever forget that moment. They told us Cecilia's heart had healed. In all of their research, they found absolutely no evidence of a hole that still remained in Cecilia's heart. They told us that her heart resembled that of a healthy 1-year-old child who would never again, ever need to mention this detour on another health form or examination from this day forward. They told us Cecilia was and is as healthy as can be. No follow-ups necessary. Fast forward to now, to today, our 8-year-old Cecilia, who beams before us with the brightest eyes and largest heart of anyone we know. Cecilia has so much love for the world, her family, her friends, animals, insects, places we visit, trees we climb. Cecilia pours all of her heart and more into everything she meets and everything she does. If there's an ant in the house, she escorts it outside. If there's a bird in the bush, she talks to it. A mouse. The mouse our cats found in the basement, the one the cats allowed to live. Cecilia asks, "Can we keep it as our pet?" Fortunately, she settled on letting the mouse go outside, but not without a chunk of cheese, a roll of bread, and a cotton ball, well equipped for a new little nest outdoors. Cecilia is one of the most kind-hearted, empathetic, compassionate, warm, and loving people I have ever met. Cecilia, thank you for bringing your love to our world. Thank you for filling our balloons with your beautiful air. The world is a better place because of you and your ginormous heart. That very same heart that surprisingly once held a hole.
Amy and Cecilia Caval. Next up, if you would welcome Megan Ladd.
A number of years ago, I was at a conference, excuse me, and on the last day, as is pretty typical, they had a big banquet where there was this nice meal, and they had awards and speeches, and afterwards, there was a little party where there was dancing and a couple of adult beverages, and when that was coming to a close, a bunch of us went off in search of the after party that we had heard about. And so we're strolling through the hotel rooms, the hotel hallways, looking for the party, and one of my friends stops, and she throws up her arms, and she just says, "I love being me." And everybody is hooting and hollering. Everybody except me. I felt like I had just been punched in the stomach. I dropped to my knees. I'm sobbing uncontrollably. Nobody knows what's going on. My friend and a couple of other women came over. They're comforting me. They're trying to get me to settle down. I finally compose myself somewhat, and I excuse myself. I go back to the hotel room. As I'm lying there, thinking about what had just happened, it struck me, it was so impactful because she had such joy in her voice. And I knew that the next day I was going to go back to Dave and the rest of my family. Dave's the one on the left. And the rest of my family. And that didn't bring me a lot of joy. Not that I didn't love everybody in my family, but I just didn't like being me. You see, I was Dave. And the conference that I was at was a gathering for the transgender community. I had struggled with my gender identity my whole life, but particularly that last year or so had been especially difficult. That night, after lots of thought, I finally decided I was going to transition. Now, there was a little bit of comfort in that, but it quickly kind of got dissipated because the whole process, it just seemed so daunting. And in addition, I knew that to varying degrees, my decision was going to be a life-changing event for everybody I knew, from my family to my friends, to my coworkers, to casual acquaintances. But I started the process. And as I was trying to make my way as a woman in the world, I came to realize that it wasn't so much that I was learning to be female, I was unlearning being male. Finally, I was starting to strip away all those barriers that I had built up guarding myself, that were hiding my true, authentic self. A friend of mine likens it to, it was like a piece of marble that slowly I was chipping away to reveal the beautiful piece of art beneath. Fast forward a couple of years, and I'm back in a hotel room. It's the night before my surgery. And I'm lying there and nervously excited, lots of anticipation, range of emotions, and I still had this little nagging occasional thought of, what if I'm wrong? What if I didn't really do the work I needed to do? So I vacillated the whole evening, excited, happy, what if? I didn't get a lot of sleep that night. When I woke up from the surgery, the first day they keep you in bed. And then the second day, the nurses come in and they encourage you to get up, take a shower, get ready, start moving about. So after they left, I kind of got myself together, went into the bathroom to take a shower, and right as I walked through the doorway, there's a full-length mirror. Sorry. There I was, finally. After 40 plus years, everything matched up. It was amazing. I was captivated by myself. I couldn't stop looking. And it was a moment filled with joy. There's a quote attributed to Anais Nin that goes something like, and the day came when the risk to remain in the blossom, to remain in the bud was more painful than the risk to blossom. I look back, January 17th, 2004, as that day when it was too painful to remain in that bud. Since that time, I've done a lot of growing and a lot of blossoming. And one thing I know for sure is I love being me.
Megan Ladd, Next up. And as he's settling, I'd like to introduce someone who I've been really wanting to be part of this series ever since we started it. And he'll be the person I introduce with his own words. And I know I have it around here somewhere. What did I do with it? You know, I have the insert. Thank you. Thank you. I believe it is here. Dan Finn has been a member of First Parish since 1949. A staff assistant to President Kennedy in the White House, a commissioner at the United States Tariff Commission, a founding director of the JFK Library, Lexington Selectman, and as he says, he has trouble holding a job. But I love this guy. He and I and Ruth Rose, every month we sneak off to go and indulge in Shakespeare. And so he may have trouble holding a job, but I'm sure he will not have trouble holding your attention. Please welcome Mr. Dan Finn.
Thank you. There have been several days that have changed my life, like the time upon graduation from college when I decided, after being a school and college and professional journalist since 5th grade, and a very good one at that, if I do say so, I would rather find a job doing stuff than writing about others doing stuff. Or that June day in 1961 when I got a call from the White House asking me to join President Kennedy's staff. Or that terrible day in Dallas. But instead, I'm going to tell you of another story. One which began in the summer of 1951, although I didn't know it then. I was the director of a Boston nonprofit called the United Council on World Affairs, and we were looking for a secretary. Among the applicants was a recent Smith graduate who, after a year in Europe, had gone to Katie Gibbs Secretarial School, which was the usual route to a job for a young woman in those days. So I hired her at $35 a week. And she turned out to be a most congenial member of our 6-person team. I didn't know much about Patsy McClary's background when I hired her until one day I came blustering into the office, spouting off about an article I'd seen in the morning paper, reporting that the president of the Armstrong Cork Company had prescribed a dress code for the people who worked there. And I thought that was absolutely atrocious, and I said so. And Patsy looked up rather shyly and said, "That's my family's company." Well, I left the council in 1954, and Patsy and I were pretty much out of touch, although we had a vague notion of each other's whereabouts through our dear mutual friends from the council days, Bill and Janine Traynor. And then, in the early spring of 2001, 50 years later, came the day that changed my life. Bill called to report that they had had lunch with Patsy in Stonington, Connecticut, where she lived, and she'd suggested that I call her. And I did. And there began the love affair that changed my life, that made me whole, that brought me joy and taught me so much. She was 73, I was 78. Being a very reserved New Englander, a Vermonter, she never talked about feelings, but she wrote about them. And she sent cards, and she showed them with presents, like this coffee cup you can see on the screen. Christmas 2014 with the initials of all of us from the World Affairs Council those days, and since she was the secretary and she labeled all the letters with my initials in, and with hers. And she found so many ways of showing me how she felt, with a smile and a hug and a visible happiness when we were on a cruise down the Danube, northern Italy, a trip to the Grand Canyon, a trip to the vineyard, a trip to visit her son, her daughter. She had very high standards and great taste in art, in dress, in food, in antiques, and for me, I must say. And she wasn't above subterfuge when it came to enforcing her taste on me. Once she asked me to do her a favor. Of course, I said yes, and she whisked me off to her manicurist. And I want to tell you, it was a ghastly experience. And then she told me if I didn't keep my nails cut, she'd take me there again. I kept my nails cut. She had a thing for rhinos, for foxes, and particularly for pigs. My family loved her as much as I did. One of my daughters-in-law wrote of her, she was such a lovely person. David said it was okay if I cried. She brought such richness into our lives. For Patsy died last February 20th, my father's birthday. But she is so much a part of me now, like breathing out and breathing in, that she'll never really be gone from me.
Now, singing a song that Dan requested called I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face, Dave Meharry.
I've grown accustomed to her face. She almost makes the day begin. I've grown accustomed to the tune she whistles night and noon. Her smiles, her frowns, her ups, her downs are second nature to me now. like breathing out and breathing in. I was serenely independent and content before we met. Surely I could always be that way again, and yet I've grown accustomed to her looks, accustomed to her voice, accustomed to her face. I've grown accustomed to her face. She almost makes the day begin. I've gotten used to hear her say good morning every day. Her joys, her woes, her highs, her lows are second nature to me now. Like breathing out and breathing in. I'm very grateful she's a woman and so easy to forget. Rather like a habit one can't always break, and yet I've grown accustomed to the trace of something in the air. I've grown accustomed to her face.
Dave Meharry, Rip Jackson. Thank you. Well, we are almost at the end of our time here at Voices on the Green. Hopefully you've enjoyed the second half as much as you've enjoyed the first half. And we are going to bring up just a few people who's helped make this night possible. So if you would come up as I call your name, if you are willing and able. Make sure I have everybody here. Our team, David Rose, where are you? He's the founder of Voices on the Green. Deb Lapidus, where are you? Please. Helen Cohen. Lee Brammy, please come here. Ann Kodari. Laura Jewett. Ben Jewett. Ruth Rose. And we would call Bill Patori, but he's busy making things happen, but we'd love him to come up here. This is the team that has made all of this happen for you guys, so thank you. We love doing it, and hopefully we will see you here again, but we'd love to have a group sing with you, and leading us is our music director, Mr. Rip Jackson, and we're all going to have a group sing of a song which, again, you should be familiar with. It is The Times Are A-Changin'. Thank you all. And helping us to go out into the world with a little bon mot for us, we'd like you to welcome Ann Mason, the minister of this church.
What an amazing night this has been. We are all so grateful for the vulnerability and the humor and the humanity that you have shown. Because with that vulnerability, we know how human we are, and we can know ourselves better and love and accept ourselves better for who we are. So thank you for your stories, for listening. Thank you for this community in which we share our true selves. And the power of our stories will carry us forward. Do not let anyone tell you that your story is not your story, but find that story and bring it forth and share it with people who love you and people who need to love you and people who need to know you. Let them know you so that you can say, amen.
Good night, you all. Have a pleasant night. Thank you from Voices on the Green.